Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military.
The whole fleet of them was on the ASA. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely.
All right, welcome back to Total Disclosure, UFOs, cover-ups, and conspiracies, where the search for truth knows no limits. I'm your host, Ty Roberts, and tonight we go deep into a case that I think shattered everything we thought we knew about alien contact. In 1973, two men from Mississippi, Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson, reported being taken aboard a craft by entities unlike anything ever seen before. Skeptics scoffed. Authorities doubted, but the evidence never waned. It never went away. Decades later, with hypnotic regression, polygraphs, multiple corroborating witnesses, and one man who was determined to seek out the truth, the Pascagoula Incident stands as one of the most credible, most investigated, and most unsettling alien abductions in history. Today, we're joined by the man who has done more than anyone other than Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson themselves to bring the full story to light. One of my best friends in this UFO field, and I think a man whose morals are unwavering, Philip Mantle, veteran researcher, publisher, and co-author of Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with Dr. Irina Scott, which I have right here. The definitive investigation into this case. Buckle up, everyone, because what you're about to hear could redefine your perception of what is real. Welcome back, man. Welcome back. Oh, my God. It's been so long, Phil.
Yeah, good evening, Tyler. Nice to speak to you again.
It's for anyone who doesn't know, I'd say for the past 6-7 months, you've been, kind of taking a step back for medical reasons. So I want to say thank you for doing this, and thank you for everything you've done for the community. And it's really good to see you up and about, my friend.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to be here.
Yeah,
I can assure you.
Better than laying on the couch just watching the world go by, and
better than lying in the hospital bed.
Yeah, I would go so stir crazy. Like within the first couple minutes, I would be like, no, I can't. I'd start doing live shows from the hospital. Like it would be bad.
Well, I mean, it wasn't a pleasant. I've been in hospital before, but last December I was in hospital for 10 days. And I wasn't well at all. But one good thing, apart from me getting out of hospital, came about. I'll just tell you the little story. So if anyone else is, hospitalized, there can be positives from it. Where I live in the county of West Yorkshire in England, I live in a little town called Pontefract. It has a famous house that's supposedly haunted. There's been lots of documentaries about it. People keep going there and things like that. Now, the house originally is what we call a council house. So it was owned by the town, and you rented it out and lived there. Right. Just so happens, in the same hospital ward as me was a guy called Bill. He was 100 years of age, and he was the first ever resident of that particular haunted house. So, yeah, it was built, and him and his wife moved in, and Bill had spent a long time in the military. He was at D-Day, for example, Once his military time was over, he became a fireman. So he worked long hours, you know, and he said most of the time I would be away from home because I'm working night shift or whatever. And he said the house was brand new. Nobody had lived there. So he put wallpaper on the walls. And the next morning when he got up, all the wallpaper is on the floor. And he says, I know how to wallpaper. I've done it 1,000 times. And then his wife kept complaining to him that he was moving things in the house. And he said, I couldn't possibly have moved it because I was at work. You know, I was a fireman. I worked in the fire department. They only stayed in the house for 8 weeks. And he came home one weekend and his wife says, don't worry about it. I've sorted it. We're moving. She planned the move while he was at work. So he was the first ever resident of this haunted house. And he was 100 years of age, Bill, you know, and I just found that out by, you know, there's only 8 of us on this little ward. We're all chatting about things, you know, got no TV or anything like that. And Bill told us the story about that. So that was strange. Yeah. Well, he also told about his wartime adventures and D-Day and playing football and being in the fire department and you know, and it just so happened that, you know, this came up in conversation and he told me the story.
And you're pretty, I mean, you're kind of like me where you're very, you're not like, you don't believe everything that everyone says just because they say it. So, what was your sense about it? Like, did you believe the man?
I asked him, I said, you know, I know of the house. I know where it is because this is only a small town, Tyler.
Right.
And, I said, did these things really happen, Bill? He said, yeah. And he said, my wife couldn't get out of there quick enough. We only stayed in the house for 8 weeks. And he said, she organized the move without me knowing. I came home from work and she said, well, we're going. And that was it.
That was it, right.
You know, because, you know, there was only 8 of us in this ward with no TV. So you're lying there all day bored stiff. So on an evening when it we're quieting down a bit, we would start and have a chat and talk about, you know, football and rugby that they used to play. Bill was 100 years of age, you know. And it was 101 in January. I hope he got there because I thankfully I was out of there before his birthday came up.
Right.
But you know, he was a fascinating man in himself, Tyler. But what I'm trying to emphasize, this is kind of what the Pascagoula case has been all about. We've been asking the questions, you know, and putting the information out there and getting feedback. Sometimes completely out of the blue, a lot of times with help from our colleagues and witnesses and so on. And this was like that, but in a little hospital ward. I was just chatting to the fella on an evening, you know, to pass the time. So it shows, my mum, God rest her, she always used to have a saying, Tyler. She said, you'll never get lost so long as you have a tongue in your head. In other words, you can always ask your way home. So you always always be nice, always talk to people. And when it comes to this subject and individual cases, do exactly the same. Just ask the questions and see what happens.
Right. And you know, if you ask the right questions, if you're asking the right questions, you'll be able to see through the bullshitters. I mean, there are people that are just like super talented liars. I mean, we know, I won't name names, but we definitely know some people that know how to talk the talk and get you to believe what they're saying. But most people, if you're asking the right questions, they're going to slip up. The details aren't going to be right. They're going to change. And you've always been really good about, I want to start off before we get into Pascagoula. There's the anniversary just came up for it, which is why I even bring it up. But the alien autopsy hoax just had the anniversary. You were like a pit bull chasing a mailman with this thing. And you got to the bottom of it. Can you, for anyone who doesn't know, can you explain what the alien autopsy was and what you did?
Well,
to
the anniversary is actually this August the 27th is when
it's coming up.
Yeah, in 1995, it was shown around the world on August the 27th. What happened was, Tyler, back in 1993,
the year I was born.
Yeah, among other things, I was press officer for the British UFO Research Association. And there was no email in those days. It was still paper. And I got a letter one day from a company in London called the Merlin Group, just asking if we could, help make a documentary. And I wrote back, sent them some information. They come back to me, and what they were looking for was to license film, video, photographs. We didn't have material that we could license, but I knew companies that did, and I put them in touch. And the guy who ran the company was a gentleman called Ray Santilli. And we started talking about, in general, about his documentary. And then out of the blue, he said, I've actually got film footage of the aliens being dissected at Roswell. He didn't call it Roswell to begin with, Tyler. He called it Roswell. And I said, well, that's great. Show me. Simple thing. If anybody makes that kind of, if anybody claims they've got something or have seen something, well, I said, fine, show me. And he said, yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I can. No, I can't. The same year was the release of the movie Fire in the Sky. It tells the Travis Walton story. Now, I was hired by the PR company to help promote the movie. And one of the things I did, I hosted Travis Walton and Mike Rogers in a presentation they gave in London one evening. And then we had a press conference afterwards. And I invited Ray Santilli along because his offices were in London, and they weren't actually far from where we were having this event. And I met him. And then he told me about, I was in America looking for old film footage of Elvis and Pat Boone and that kind of stuff. And I bought some off an old boy. And he came back to me and said he'd been in the military and he had some film of Roswell. Was I interested? And he claimed he saw it and he bought it. So again, I said, fine, show me.
Right.
So this went on and we weren't getting anywhere. And
show me the Roswell.
Well, yeah. If anybody makes a claim, I've got pictures, I've got document. Well, the simple thing, then show me. Anyway,
provide them. Right.
We move forward to 1995, and the movie Roswell was being released here by Sony on video. That was made by Paul Davids, and they'd actually sent us a copy for review. So, and it prompted me to think about this guy Santilli again. So I had his phone number. I phoned him up, and I said, "Have you still got that film? You claim to have the Roswell film." He says, "Yes, but you don't believe me, Philip." So I said, "Well, show me." So he said, "Okay, make an appointment with my secretary. Come on down." Now, I live 200 miles north of London. It's nothing for an American, isn't 200 miles. I know that. But here it's a long way. So my wife and I drove down to meet Ray Santilli at his office. And he popped a video in the machine. And there was a piece of grainy film with a creature on a slab and two men in white coats. He called it the tent footage. He said these were where the aliens were put into a field tent before being shipped away. So I thought, great. Not only that, Tyler, he gave me a copy. He gave me a copy I had a copy on VHS. I took it home with me. And then we made an appointment. He says, "I've got some more being processed. So in the coming weeks, my wife and I drove down to London. Eventually, we saw two other autopsies. He just showed a still of one of them. There is another autopsy film where the creature isn't damaged. You know, its legs are intact. It's a bit brighter. And then he showed us some wreckage. So I said to Ray Santilli, what do you intend to do with this film? And he said, I'm going to make my own documentary and we're going to release it on video.
Right.
And you'll buy it from me or you buy it in your local video store.
Right.
You know. Now, I was just thinking on my feet, I thought this film needs to get out into the open. That way we'll find out more about it. I was also Bufora's conference organizer. So that year in 1995, I already had a conference all set up for August in the city of Sheffield in South Yorkshire. So I just said to Ray Santilli, will you show the film at our conference? And he said, yeah. There was no contract. There was no money involved. We shook hands.
Just a gentleman's agreement.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just by fluke, the story got out. I let slip to a journalist about the film. And it just went bananas, Tyler. I mean, this was, you won't remember because you said it's the year you were born. The X-Files was at its height.
Peak.
You know,
peak.
Yeah, absolutely. Roswell, the anniversary was coming up in a couple of years, so there was also rumblings about that. And, you know, I literally got faxes and phone calls from TV companies around the world. And I just put them in touch with Santilli. He had a private screening on May the 5th, 1995 at a venue in London. And that's when a lot of the journalists made arrangements with him, including Bob Kivier in the States. And it was Bob who did the Fox documentary, Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, which was so successful, they had to do 3 specials to follow it up.
Right, because the demand was so.
Yeah,
and people forget. People, I don't mean to cut you off, Phil, but
no.
For anyone who doesn't remember or isn't realizing, this is before the internet's the internet. This is before the world was connected the way it was it's connected today. So for the demand to be so high on this, I mean, the networks were just raking it in at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Ray came to our conference, showed the film. I mean, we could have sold the tickets for it, 10 times over. I'll give you an example. I think it was the day before. I had a phone call from a lady wanting a ticket, and I said, there aren't any. And she was in Washington, D.C. And she said, I'm coming anyway. And I said, what's your name? So she gave me, I took her name. My wife was on the door taking the tickets. And I said, if this lady turns up, please find her a seat. Because I admire her courage, coming all that way.
Right.
With no guarantee even getting through. And Tyler, she turned up. And we had a couple of seats at the back where some of our stewards were sat. And I just asked one of them to stand up and sat her down. And we had film crews from around the world, even a Chinese TV company turned up. And the following day, the film was actually broadcasting around the world. So we were the first to see it in public, but it then went out on Fox and all the places around the world. And I'm sat there thinking, great, my plan has worked. We've got it out. We couldn't have got more coverage for it. And I'm thinking the answers will start to come in,
Can I?
But nothing, Tyler. Absolutely nothing. No.
Nothing came in?
No, I'm thinking somebody's going to come forward and say, that's me, I'm an actor, or maybe that's my grandfather told me about this film. Or,
right. Some sort of production, someone in the production or behind it is going to say, wait, guys, you're taking, this isn't
but
real.
Nothing, absolutely nothing. So I had to make a decision what to do. A lot of people are saying it's a hoax. That's an easy thing to do. What happened was there was one guy, he accused me of being Ray Santilli's accomplice.
Yes.
So he actually accused me of helping fake it and rake the money in accordingly. And the way he came to that conclusion, at the time, my wife and I had a growing family and we were building an extension on our house.
And he said, you're using the money. Yep.
Yeah. Where does he get the money from? He doesn't have it. Well, I don't know how he knew that in the first place, but he was right. I didn't have it, but my wife did. She'd had her own property before we met, and she'd sold that, and we used some of that to build the extension.
Which is none of his business in the first place.
But he accused me of being an accomplice. So it became personal. So I was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter what. And I told Santilli this, and he just said, okay, Philip. You know, he didn't bat an eyelid. And so, like I said, I had to make a decision. So what I did, rightly or wrongly, in public or in private with Ray Santilli, I supported him. And, you know, in the meantime, I'm still digging around in the background to try and find out what happened. And it took a long time, Tyler. We don't have time to go through all, but slowly but surely, bit by bit, I'd find a little bit of information that would lead to something else. Then we'd maybe reach a dead end, and then we'd look elsewhere. What I used to say to myself was that every now and again I would shake the alien autopsy tree to see if anything fell out of it. You know, and it took, you know, a lot of years, but eventually we found the man who faked it is a gentleman called Spiros Malaris. Spiros is a filmmaker, he's a magician, he's an entrepreneur. He had his own studio at one point. The man who made the dummies was a sculptor. We'd been looking for a special effects expert, and it was a British sculptor called John Humphreys.
Yeah, so you were looking in the wrong place, because you were looking visual effects and like CGI and that thing, but it was practical.
Yeah, I mean, the special effects industry in Britain is not large. And I started off phoning special effects guys, and they'd say, it's not me, maybe ask so-and-so. So I go and speak to the next guy. He had no idea. And we just never got anywhere. But John Humphreys has worked in the film business, film and television, but by profession, he is a sculptor, not a special effects artist. So it took a long time, but we got there. And, you know, Ray Santilli changed his story, which is nothing new, you know. And like I said, in August of this year,
the story changing.
Yeah, it's the anniversary. So I dare say Ray might have something up his sleeve. I don't know. I haven't heard from him in a while. But the point is, Tyler, a lot of people say, yeah, it's hoax. That's easy. That's an easy thing to do.
Yes, it is.
You know, but to prove things are a hoax, as I found with the alien autopsy film, was a lot more difficult.
And that's, I think that's what I've always respected about you, Phil, is you're not. So one of the things that I think the community has a really big issue with, and it's being humble and admitting when you were wrong, and saying, I made a mistake. But we're all fallible in that way. We're all we're all susceptible to, you know, kind of like the I want to believe. You fall into that in some way, some part of your brain. I mean, I think must have, Phil, when you first saw the film, something in your brain was like, this is either a really, really good fake, or it might be actually the real thing.
Well, you know, the first piece of film I saw hasn't really been on television. It's called the tent footage. And it's very dark.
Right, that's the one from the darker one.
Yeah, so it's very
People
dark.
People claim that that's real, but not.
Well, it's not. I know who made it. I've interviewed who made it, but...
These guys, right?
Well, no. But, so you've got a creature on a slab. It's covered up, but you can see the head and the hands and the feet. The other side of it are a couple of people in white coats, and they seem to be handling some fleshy-like material. There's a lamp hanging up, and somebody walks in front of the camera every now and again with their back towards them. And it's very poor quality film, Tyler, but that's what I expected to see. I was quite happy with that. And I, at first, thought, that's it, you know?
Right.
Because it's supposedly been left in somebody's basement for nearly 50 years, you know?
Right, right.
But
That's
then
it.
Ray Santilli went on to say, no, I've got more film. And then we saw the more graphic autopsy and then the wreckage. Later on, he even produced an interview with the alleged cameraman, and that was, not surprisingly, a fake as well. So we got to the bottom of all these different films, and
yeah. So
I just thought, well, one of the ideas I had at the beginning, when you sat in Ray Santilli's office, which I have done on many occasions, he never made anything himself, Tyler. He was a guy who would buy stuff, would license it. His main income was from music.
So he was more like a producer?
More like that, yeah. But he was a buyer and a seller and licensed stuff. For example, I'm in his office one day and he's got a shoebox and it's full of photographs of the Beatles that he bought at an auction and they'd never been seen before anywhere. So he owned them, so he could license them or sell them or whatever. So I wondered at the beginning, maybe somebody had pulled a fast one on him. He bought this stuff, and then it turned out not to be real, but he didn't really care anyway. He thought, well, I'll go with it. And the film took off, Tyler, like nobody expected. It had a life of its own.
And that's going to be, that's kind of, as someone who's in media, as someone who's in that business, the business of being seen, right? That's the biggest thing in media, is either being seen or heard, right? So when you start getting all this attention, I mean, it's like having something going viral now. It's the endorphin rush. It's easy to maybe sacrifice some of your moral code or morality. And you do things that you maybe normally wouldn't. You cross lines you normally wouldn't, so you can keep the party going.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to get to the bottom of it, whichever way it was.
Right, and, but Ray had clearly a vested interest in it.
Well, he made no bones about it, Tyler. He said, I want to commercialize the film. It's my film. I own it. I'll do with it as I see fit. Because I introduced, for example, Ray Santilli to Stanton Friedman. And they actually met in London. And Stanton then faxed Ray a number of demands, not requests.
That's the way Stanton was.
A list of demands. And Santilli said, who is this man? That's my film. And I'll do with it as I please. So I learned straight away, Santilli's character. And had I gone down a similar route to Stanton, that would have been the end of it, Tyler. He would have just not answered my phone calls anymore. And then, of course, the internet started. Not like it is today. There was no Google or anything like that. But it became the first ever UFO battle online with the old green lettering and things like that. And, it took off. Santilli later on made a movie just called Alien Autopsy. And the only thing that is really accurate in that movie is how the film takes off and had a life of its own. And it really did. And, Santilli just went with it. He had no idea what was going to happen. None of us did. And here we are 30 years later, still talking about the damn thing.
Right. We just spent the first 20 minutes talking about it. So, it's clearly kind of taken on, a life of its own because, the reason I think that we do need to bring it up in cases like right now, like me and you talking, is because, that footage is still circulating and people are seeing it for the first time. And then they don't do their due diligence and check sources. No, they just go, oh, wow, that looks cool. That looks real. But they don't know the whole backstory. So that's really
it's embedded in popular culture now as well. Not that long ago, you could buy an alien autopsy cake in America for Halloween. It was on The Simpsons. It was on Seinfeld and various other bits and pieces. So
right. It was like the original, you know, the mummies that are going around, the Nazca
Yeah.
mummies. It's
Yeah.
like the original version of that.
Yeah. Well, it's when you saw the so-called Roswell slides unveiled in Mexico. When you look at the backstory of how that came about, it's exactly the same as the alien autopsy film. It's like they've used that as a blueprint for another Roswell fake, which it was, of course. So if there's anybody out there listening now and thinks that the alien autopsy film is real in any way, shape or form, let me assure you, it is not. I wish it was. I would have loved it to be authentic, but it's not. And
that's
there you go.
Yeah, and there you go. And so we're gonna switch over to what I think the crown jewel, something that's totally opposite in the sense of how it turns out, right? Because the longer you dive into Pascagoula, the more sure and more I mean the more of a beyond a reasonable doubt, something to quote your title here, the more assured I become that something crazy, something happened that night, and it's beyond a reasonable doubt. What happened might not be exactly the same, right? We might have some details off, but something extraordinary happened in 1973. So, in your own words, Phil, what makes the Pascagoula incident so unique compared to the thousands of other abduction claims throughout the years and throughout that time, even specifically?
Yeah, we're going back to, of course, to October the 11th, 1973. And there was very few abduction cases in the public domain at that point. And like then as now, most cases are of a single individual. So it's usually one person on their own. Here we have two. I know Betty and Barney Hill,
Right.
Then there's the location. Where the location were, where they were fishing on the Pascagoula River that night, is not an out-of-the-way spot. Right opposite them is shipbuilding on the river. To the left and to the right, there are bridges going across the river, one for traffic, I think the other was for rail. Behind them is commercial and residential properties. So it wasn't an out-of-the-way location. And then we add to that, Tyler, within no time at all of the incident happening, they're in the sheriff's department being interviewed on tape. They were recorded. And we have one of those recordings. We have Charlie Hickson at Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Then both men were placed in a room by themselves, and the deputy said, "I'm just going to get some coffee." And what they didn't know is they were being secretly recorded. And the deputy came back, retrieved the recording out of the desk in the room next to them, and him and the sheriff played it back and thinking, right, we'll catch them now. These two old boys were laughing and joking at us, but of course they weren't. They were crawling up the walls, especially Calvin. Calvin was only 18, almost 19 at the time, as Calvin on the right, and Charlie Hickson was age 42, a veteran of the Korean War, so combat in Korea did Charlie, and they were both petrified. The next day, they're at the Singing River Hospital being checked out, and from there they go to Keesler Air Force Base, where they are checked for radiation, which was 0. But then the powers that be said, well, why are you here, guys? Why don't you tell us what happened? And they didn't have a tape recorder, but what they had was a stenographer. So we have a complete transcript of their interview there as well. And so all that, just at that point in 1973, makes this case unique. But it was what we uncovered, many, many years later that has solidified that uniqueness and has expanded the case. It's not just Charlie and Calvin anymore. It's other individuals in and around the area. And we've uncovered documentation, photographs, other audio recordings by the powers that be. Dr. Hynek and Dr. James Harder were on site within 2 days, interviewing Charlie and Calvin I'm putting them both, trying to put them both under hypnosis. We actually have Calvin's hypnosis. It's 11 minutes long. It's very poor quality, but we have it. And thanks to David Marler at the National UFO Record Center in Albuquerque, he recovered the APRO files a couple of years back. And of course, Dr. Harder was part of APRO. And in there are recordings from that time, but I don't think anybody's ever heard them. And that they're recordings with Hynek, with Harder, with the sheriff, Sheriff Fred Diamond. Yep. And we have all of those. And much more since.
I was just at Contact in the Desert, and I had the amazing opportunity, and I'm going to have him here in studio pretty soon too. Paul Hynek. And I got the chance to talk to him. I'm not going to give it away, give too much out, because there's something that I'm working on with it. But when I got to talk to Paul about it, I asked him why or how, how did Project Blue Book pick, choose, and select the cases that they would investigate. And I mean, he went into the whole story, but like you said, within a day or two, his father ends up on the scene. Yeah, and his father, this is probably one of the cases that he says starts to turn his father's belief from skeptic to holy shit, there's something really going on here. Because in the media, like South Park really did a disservice to the UFO subject when they aired their first episode and had the anal probe stuff in there. That was taken from Whitley Strieber, and then Calvin and Calvin and Charles get taken, and that becomes, whether it's true or not, the stereotypical abduction case becomes farmers or ranchers in the middle of nowhere fishing. They get taken by a flying saucer, probed anally, and then brought back, and their life is never the same. And so this stereotypical abduction scenario is kind of merged from Whitley Strieber and the Calvin Parker Charles Hickson case, and pop culture, or the deep state, if that's who's really running things, they make it out to be like nothing's. I mean, this is all just like crazy people and mentally ill. But J. Allen Hynek didn't think so.
Calvin stayed friends with Dr. Hynek, and he later became friends with Paul, because Calvin would ring Dr. Hynek at home, and it was usually Paul as a young boy that would answer the phone. And they used to have a blackboard next to the phone, and he would write messages on the blackboard. Yep. And so Calvin and Paul Hynek became friends in their own right many, many years later. And Paul has gone on the record saying that his father thought this was a very solid case, and it would have been even further impressed had he known about what we've uncovered in this last couple of years.
Oh my God! I mean, if only we could bring him back to show him what's been uncovered recently. And I mean, you've been coming up with so people know the Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker story, but is it Maria Blair?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was, I got the rights to republish Charlie Hickson's book, UFO Contact of Pascagoula. It came out in 1983. Yeah, and you could buy a copy online, but it cost you a fortune because it didn't sell that many. Right. And I got the rights to it, and I knew Charlie had passed away in 2011. And so I thought, well, I don't know about Calvin. I couldn't find any obituary for him, so I assumed he was alive. I managed to find him, and I spoke to him on the phone. He was very nice, but clearly wasn't going to tell me an awful lot. No. Unbeknownst to me, behind the scenes, just a few weeks before I phoned him, Calvin had been to a funeral. A friend of his had died. And as they're coming out of the funeral home, he signed the book of condolence. And those coming behind him recognized his name. And they're doing the sort of pointing and wink, wink, you know. And Calvin thought that was, you know, very disrespectful. But his wife, Waynette, who was engaged to him at the time when this happened, she said, why don't you write a damn book and you tell everybody your story? He still hadn't told his story in full. Mm-hmm. So he mentioned this to me, and I said, well, I'll publish your book. And he said, well, you know, he says, every time I give an interview, the journalist changes it. Well, I said, I'll adapt my contract, and whereby I cannot publish anything until you say it's okay. You give me the green light. And that's what we did. He wanted
his spelling errors in there.
Yeah,
he wanted his grammatical errors in there. Yeah. He wanted it exactly the way he wrote it.
Yeah.
Like a journal.
Did. Yeah. And it came out and it was pretty successful. What happened was a local journalist by the name of Karen Nelson came up to interview Calvin. And she, as well as just writing an article about him, she did like a little mini documentary, you know, about 8 minutes long.
Right.
So when you viewed her article online, this little video was embedded in it. Somebody took that, Tyler, and put it on YouTube. So I'm reading the comments underneath it. And there's one comment, and it says, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night. They too saw the UFO. So I thought, oh, hang on a minute. I found this young lady elsewhere on social media, and I explained who I was and what we were doing. And she said, I said, could we speak to your mum and dad? She says, I'll ask them. And she came back and said, yes. And that was Maria and Jerry Blair. I spoke to them first, and Maria told me that Jerry at the time worked offshore. The company he worked for used to service the oil rigs. And he was on site, she was with him on the opposite side of the river that night. There was a little boat there to take him out to work, but the boss hadn't turned up, he was late. So Jerry was trying to get asleep in the back of the car, and he's not in the best of moods. Maria said, we saw this blue thing. Bearing in mind, Charlie and Calvin said that the UFO emitted this intense blue light.
Yes.
So we saw this blue thing come down the river. Not in the river, you know, and she said it went opposite us over the other bank of the river and seemed to be either looking for somebody or it was lost. Now, she knew the area. She knew there was no airfield there. There's no helicopters, you know. And then she said, we decided, me and her husband, to walk down this pier and put his clothes on the boat. And she says, as we're walking down the pier, there's this huge splash in the water next to me. And out of the water, and these are her words, comes this grey man. And it came right up to her face, literally right there. And then it went back down into the water and was gone. And Maria was quite emotional about this. And I asked her,
as anyone should be.
Yeah. And she said, I can see, I've got impressions. I can see something out of my peripheral vision. But I can't quite make it out what it is. And she said, I often wondered if something similar hadn't happened to us that happened to Charlie and Calvin. So her husband went to work. She said it was about 9 o'clock when this happened, but she wasn't sure. They didn't have a watch. When she got back to the car, she legged it. She ran like hell. It was 12 o'clock. So there's several hours to account for.
Quite a bit of time that's missing.
Yeah, so Jerry came back home and said, don't tell anybody. We'll think we're nuts. So they told their two daughters, who are now grown up, that they've seen these blue lights, but they didn't mention anything else. So Calvin's book comes out. It does well. One of the local charities in the area raised some money to have a historic marker near the site. And that was officially opened by the mayor. And Maria and Jerry Blair came along to the opening because it was publicized locally. And they were interviewed by the local TV. And again, they just talked about these blue lights they'd seen. They didn't mention the grey man on TV. And then I'd pass Maria and Jerry's details on to my colleague, Dr. Irina Scott. I published some of Irina's books previously, and it was just easier for somebody in the States to interview people there than it was from this strange sounding Yorkshireman from the other side of the Atlantic. So Dr. Scott took over from there. What happened was Jerry took ill, seriously ill, and he was in hospital, and he was going to have an operation. He wasn't sure if he was going to make it. There's Irina. So he said to Maria, phone Mr. Mantle. And he literally phoned me from his hospital bed. And Maria has a recording of it, a video of it as well, saying, I lied. I saw everything my wife saw, you know. And he's still got the stickers on his chest, his bare chest, like sitting on his hospital bed. Thankfully, he made it through the operation, but it was only a stopgap. You know, he was gonna pass away.
Yes, and so something, it was, he, in his mind, it could have gone really bad that day, you know what I mean? So he was getting the deathbed confession ready, essentially.
Well, what happened, he then said to his wife, Maria, I've got something to tell you. And he said, we too were abducted. And he told her the whole story. And what it is, Maria wasn't looking out of her peripheral vision. She actually had her eyes screwed up, tightly closed. And she could look out of the corner of her eye, and she looked up to the other end of the pier, and two of these creatures were there with her husband. And they were the same creatures as Charlie and Calvin reported. And Jerry said, I've got my eye on that one, as if one of them was in charge or something of that nature. And then they went back across the river. And, you know, Dr. Scott is recording all this. You know, Maria's telling Irina one way or another. And then sadly, you know, Jerry did pass away.
Yeah.
So we had all that information. We made a documentary. But before that, Maria came back to us and said she'd like to undergo hypnosis. We declined to begin with because we thought she's still grieving over her husband.
Right. And
she came.
That will taint. I mean, you just don't want to press that line.
Well, yeah. So she came back again sometime later, and we said, okay, I'll see what I can do. So all I did, Tyler, was look online at some hypnotherapists in the area. And I just sent them an email asking if they did regressive hypnosis. I didn't tell them what I needed. And a lady stepped forward called Crystal Slaughter. And she says, yeah. And she says, I'll even go to the client's home if it's better for them. They can come here, but I can go there. So we arranged for Crystal to put Maria under regressive hypnosis. And this was done at Calvin's house. She'd become friends now with Calvin and his wife, Waynette. She knew Calvin had had hypnosis before. So he was there, you know. And we didn't tell the hypnotherapist anything. We just said date, time, and location. That was it.
Nothing about what they would be hearing.
No, not what we didn't know if we were going to hear anything. So we just said date, time, and location. And I hired a local cameraman, a professional, to film it. So we had it, you know, on the record as well. And Maria is very emotional under hypnosis. There's big gaps between question and answer. And I know that there are those out there that said hypnosis is not the way to do things. They may be right, they may be wrong, but this is what Maria wanted. This wasn't from us. And to cut a long story short, she said these creatures were interested in her eggs. They wanted to make beings that looked like us but could walk amongst us unrecognized. I mean, none of us were expecting any of that. You should have seen the hypnotherapist's face when Maria started talking about this. Maria's opinion then went on to be that they had been abducted. She's firmly believed they're abducted by aliens. And she believed that that they'd had experiences before, but, you know, she couldn't remember any of it. And then she believed that her and Jerry were the actual targets that night, not Charlie and Calvin, simply because of the fact that they were supposed to be at that location at that time. And Charlie and Calvin only decided to go there that day coming home from work. So they were like collateral damage, if you like. You know, that was her opinion. We have no evidence of any of that. That's just her opinion. Jumping forward in time, we did a documentary and we missed out on interviewing Maria. So we have a lady in the area called Chelsea Norton Prince. She's part of the Ocean Springs Historical Society. She has an interest in the case. She met Calvin, bought his book. So I asked Chelsea, I said, do you have an iPhone? He says, yeah. I said, could you film an interview with Maria on your iPhone? It's not perfect, I know that, but it's better than nothing, Tyler. So
right.
We did that. I sent some questions for Chelsea to ask Maria, and Maria talks away. One of the questions I wanted to clarify was, when did you first meet Calvin Parker? Bear in mind, she'd gone to the opening of the historical marker, and I believe that's when they first met. She came back and she said, I first saw Calvin Parker when he was abducted. And she claims she saw what was happening on the other side of the river. And she said, I thought it was men playing around, you know, messing around, doing stupid things. Then things started to happen to them. So she take her eye off what was going on the other side of the river.
Right. She had her own problem to deal with.
Yeah. So
are you saying that there is a possibility that Maria saw Calvin and Charles being abducted across the river? That's
what she claims, yes. And bear in mind, her husband, Jerry, who wasn't the most talkative of men, you know, I did speak to him. He did say, you know, I lied. I saw the same as my wife. He called them the humanoids. He said, I saw the humanoids go back out across the water. So Jerry's deathbed confession wasn't an overnight thing. It took, you know, several months before he passed away. But right to his dying breath, he was still trying to tell his wife, Maria, what had happened to them. And then Maria has since claimed that she'd had other contacts with them on a psychological level, and a sighting of one of the UFOs, whatever you want to call it. And
well, we can't forget that Charles also. This is even back in when the Pascagoula case was unfolding, if you will. Charles said that he had another encounter, and so did Calvin. Right?
Yeah. What it was with Charlie, he claimed that he would hear voices.
Yes. So again, this is more
from these beings. Although these beings at the time, these ugly things, didn't actually make a noise, but it was from them. And Charlie became almost like a contactee. These beings were going to help mankind, were going to help humanity, and he was going to be part of it. He didn't know what the hell it was, just that he was going to be part of it. He had another sighting, which was witnessed by all the family, and they were all in the same car. It was in daylight. That's all in his book, of course.
Yes.
So Maria is of a similar nature. Yes. Calvin, again, this is what we were talking about at the beginning of all this, Tyler, was asking the right people the right questions and asking them in the right manner as well.
Right.
Via Peter Robbins, who was assistant to Bud Hopkins for many years.
Yeah, I just interviewed him at Contact.
Yeah, well, we found out that Bud Hopkins had actually put both Charlie and Calvin under hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie twice in the 1980s, a few years apart. Calvin in 1993. Calvin had another encounter in 1993 on his own, again, out in a little boat fishing. And he told a friend of his. And his friend said, there's a guy called Hopkins doing a UFO conference in Florida. They drove there unannounced, to the hotel that was having this convention. His friend went in, Calvin wouldn't go in, found Bud. Bud says, here's my room key, I'll meet him there. And he met Calvin in his hotel room. I knew Bud pretty well, and put him under hypnosis. Not only that, he recorded it. So we have the audio recording of that hypnosis session, and we also have the 2 hypnosis sessions with Charlie Hickson and Bud Hopkins. Like I said, they're a few years apart. The 2 recordings with Charlie, one talks about some encounters he had as a young fella, a young boy, and then what happened in 1973. Similar, Calvin talked about what happened. And then we had the opportunity in, I think it was 2022, Kathleen Marden, who is a hypnotherapist, was in town. So we put Calvin under hypnosis then, and we recorded it audio. And Calvin goes through what happened in 93, 73. And lo and behold, he had 2 encounters as a young boy as well. And he talks about them. So we've got all, this more and more evidence has been accumulated, but simply because we asked the right questions. Now, at the time of their encounter in 1973, Calvin says Charlie was grabbed by 2 of these creatures and they scratched his arm. Right. Calvin claims while he was on board, they removed his lower clothing and his shoes and socks, and they stuck something in his foot, and it hurt. So when I started to write the book with Calvin, I asked him, I said, do you have any photos, Calvin, or documents, anything? He says, no. He said, I lost all of those in Hurricane Katrina. The house was under 10 feet of water. So my job while he's writing, I'm politely asking people, do you have anything on Pascagoula? The first place I went to was the Center for UFO Studies, founded in 1973 by Dr. Hynek.
Yes.
They sent me a file. In the middle of this file is a 1-page typewritten document file. It's written on an old typewriter. It's dated October the 13th, 1973. So it's 2 days after the event. It's 1 page, and it basically describes Charlie and Calvin stripping down to their underwear and giving the once over. And they found puncture wounds in Charlie Hickson's arm and Calvin Parker's foot. Bearing in mind, these guys had said, Charlie said they scratched his arm, and Calvin said they stuck something in his foot. He mentioned photographs, but there were no photographs. And I thought this document is great. I asked Calvin, who the hell gave you the once over? He said it was Dr. Harder. He wasn't a medical doctor, but he had the foresight just to look them over. About a year, 18 months later, I had an email out of the blue from the same gentleman at the Center for UFO Studies. He says, Philip, I've been rummaging through some files today. I assume you've already got these. I wasn't looking for them, but I found them, and here you go. Lo and behold, it's the photographs to go with this document. So you have Charles.
Now we have
Hickson.
The puncture holes.
Yeah, so you have Charlie Hickson's forearm with the marks in it, Calvin's foot. And these are photographs. They're not digital. They were digitized, obviously, but so they were scanned back and front, and on the back is the person's names. So we know which photo. So we have their testimony saying we were scratched. Calvin said they stuck something in my foot. We have this written document that's probably by Dr. James Harder, and then we have 2 photographs to go with it.
So they're
not laser guided incisions or anything like that, Tyler. But they are minor injuries, but they do support the testimony of these 2 guys.
And let's step back a sec. Is there any you don't think that there's any possibility that these guys set out? A lot of people say that they were drinking, and maybe they concocted this idea after the fact to gain some notoriety. But I mean, that just doesn't add up in my book.
No, because the first discussion they had when this had happened, I have to remember Calvin was due to get married the following month. He didn't live in the area. He lived in Laurel. Mississippi, which is nearly 200 miles away, I believe. He'd gone there to work. That was
Yes,
his
he had
first
just
day.
gotten that job too, right?
That was his first day. He said, I got hired, fired, and abducted on the same day. So he didn't know the area at all. And one of the things he was worried about was his future father-in-law finding out, and he said he won't let me marry Waynette. So the first discussion they had afterwards was, we're not going to tell anybody. Not a word. So they go to Calvin's car, which is, by the way, is a brand new Rambler Hornet, whatever the hell one of them is. That's what he was driving. It was bright yellow, and the passenger window facing the UFO was shattered. It fell out. And when Calvin gets in the car, he said it took him 20 attempts to start it, and this was a brand new car. So they set off with the intention on going home. But then Charlie had a change of heart. Remember, Charlie was in the army and fought in Korea. He said, we've got to tell somebody. What if this thing comes back? Does this to somebody else?
Right.
What if this is the start of an invasion? So they pull in at a local store that's got a payphone. There's no mobile phones in 1973.
This is a Rambler Hornet.
You know, that's what they were driving. So
and it was brand new.
Brand spanking new. So they first phoned Keesler Air Force Base. Keesler said, Project Bull Book is closed. We don't have anything to do with UFOs. Phone your local authorities. So they phoned the police. Just so happens that the guy who took the phone call from them was Sheriff Diamond's son, Mick Diamond. He was the police dispatcher on duty that night, and he passed the call then through to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Now, Mick is still alive, and we communicated with him, and he said, Philip, I must have had over 50 telephone reports of UFOs that night. And he says, not only that, when I logged off my shift and went back to the station, there were people there in person reporting it in person.
And were they all saying some? I mean, is it?
Well, I'll give you an example, Tyler. Give you an example. He said one of the fellows reporting something in person was a minister. So he was a member of what we call the clergy. Right. Okay. Right. So when Calvin's book comes out, I was contacted by a guy in Greece who've since become good friends. He's called Stephanos, and his surname is Panagiotakis. Now, Stephanos was a UFO researcher and writer, and not in 1973, but in 1981, he was in the Greek Merchant Navy. He was a radio operator, and they docked in Pascagoula. Now, that was his favorite case, so they had a week's layover. So he set off to get an interview with Charlie Hickson, which he did. He went to the police station and explained what he was trying to do. He was writing for a magazine back home, and they said, oh, why don't you speak to Pastor, a clergyman, Pastor Emmanuel Sigalis? And here's his address. So Stephanos literally went and knocked on his door. Just by coincidence, the pastor was in, and his family were of Greek origin. Then you've got a Greek guy standing on my doorstep. So Stephanos went in, interviewed him, wrote his story up. And of course, since then he's passed away, but he still had a copy of his interview. Mm-hmm. What the pastor said was, on that night of October the 11th, 1973, him and another chap by the name of Don Broadhurst, Don worked for the Pascagoula Police Department. And
so again, these are credible witnesses.
Yeah. Then we have a young church volunteer, a young lady in the back of the car. They're going to a meeting that is run by the church for people who had alcohol problems.
Oh, the old AA meeting.
Yeah. Now they're driving away, and it's this young lady who's looking out of the side window, and she points out this thing that's coming, and it went right over in front of them, right across the road in front of them. They even drew a picture for Stephanos. It looks pretty similar to what Charlie and Calvin said, and it was heading in that general direction. Now, Pascagoula has since passed away, as the other gentleman in the car, Don Broadhurst, passed away. What about this young lady in the back seat? Now, what I'm saying is, here we have a clergyman on the record, and we have Mick Diamond going back to the police station saying, there's a minister in there reporting it. Are they the same guy? I can't imagine there'd be that ministers reporting UFOs that night. Anyway, we managed to find the name of this lady in the back seat. She wasn't a native of the area. She'd gone to work there for a couple of years. I think she taught at the local school and helped out at the church. But I found a couple of social media accounts for her. We got a name, but they hadn't been used in a long time. And I left it at one point, Tyler, because we couldn't seem to contact it. And for some reason, a while later, I went back to one of these accounts, and there was a name of a church on it. So I just simply Googled the church, and it was a church in Maryland, whatever the hell that is.
That's a little south of Boston. It's south of Boston, Massachusetts.
I know where that is, right up. So the church also had a website. So I'm looking on the website, and there was a couple of sermons that you could download, and it told you who the sermons were. Now, this lady was called Joanne Hallmark, and here we had two sermons by two people called Hallmark. And I'm thinking, is this her son's? Is it her husband? So I sent the church a very nondescript email just saying, we're looking to speak to Joanne Hallmark. She worked with Pastor Sigalis back in 1973, Pascagoula. If she's around, can you pass this email on, please? Yeah, and that was it.
Right.
3 or 4 weeks later, she replied. So now I had to tell her what we were all about. So I did. And she came back to us again a few weeks later, sent a fresh photograph of what she looks like now. I'd sent the old black and white one of her, which she found very amusing. She confirmed all of what she'd seen. Dr. Irina Scott spoke to her on the phone and interviewed her on the phone as well. So that's how things have happened, Pascagoula-wise. And was the pastor and the minister the same person that night at the police station? I don't know, but the police station certainly had his details because they told Stephanos.
Right. So it does add up. And it falls in line. Again, you're looking for these threads, and they keep kind of being pinned back to that something extraordinary happened on the Pascagoula River.
Yeah, and a number of people have said, oh, these two guys were drinking moonshine and whatever. But listen, Tyler, I come from an Irish family. My family at times, certainly when there were celebrations, could drink, And I've never known any of them hallucinate anything, ever.
No, you black out.
Yeah. So it's a
you
nonsense.
Don't remember abduction that didn't happen.
Calvin didn't drink anyway. I think Charlie liked a beer or two, but so what? It's no big deal. Mm-hmm. And but then we have all these other people around it. So it's not just about Charlie and Calvin.
Right. You could essentially, and obviously, this, it wouldn't be this way, but you could, at this point in time, with all the evidence given, we could take Calvin and Charles out of the equation and still have a pretty good case.
Absolutely. And that's why we called the book Beyond Reasonable Doubt. Irina and I had written the book, We had another title for it. I can't remember what it was. And I was sat watching a courtroom drama one night on the TV, and they said, we have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. I emailed Irene and said, I think I've got a title for the book. Because what we, as you've just said, Tyler, we believed, right, if we took all the evidence we'd accrued and all those people, put them in a courtroom, we could prove, not that they were abducted by aliens, but we could prove that something out of the ordinary took place that night, you know?
Yes.
And it wasn't just located with Charlie and Calvin.
Correct. And I now someone had asked it earlier, and I meant to get to it. Now there was a more official sighting or something that happened with was it the Navy?
Yeah.
Where they saw a blue glow under the water?
Yeah, what happened was, it was just about 3 weeks later. I believe it was either November the 6th or November the 9th. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it was in the same stretch of river where Charlie and Calvin were fishing that night, but a bit further out. And there were 3 local fishing boats, 3 little skiffs with 8 people in them, were out fishing. And it was dark. But they saw something under the water. It was circular. It was about 30 feet in diameter. And it was segmented. Like they likened it to like the old parachutes in the Second World War, where they had segments in them.
Oh,
they got so close. They got so close to this thing, they literally put an oar in the water and hit it, and it went clunk. Yeah. Then the lights went off, and then it would appear elsewhere, and they would chase it like a cat and mouse. So one of the skiffs went to the Coast Guard station and reported it in person.
All right, that was the Coast Guard.
So they sent a boat out. They too saw it, and they too hit it with a pole or an oar, and it went clunk again. Now, we have the full Coast Guard reports, completely unredacted, and it gave us all the names of the people. In fact, I've got a Freedom of Information Act request still going through, because they got all the civilians and interviewed them. So they have that interview on tapes. Now, whether it still exists or not, I don't know. So I'm still trying to get access to that tape. The next day, the Navy came out and they got one of the guys that was there the night before, and he thought the Navy were a bit stupid, because he said, well, it happened there. There's just nothing there. It's just water, you know. And it was said that the Navy were going to produce a report, but we've never seen it. We've never found it. So maybe they didn't. But we have the complete Coast Guard report. And it says in that these things were unidentified. So, again, because I've been putting the feelers out, one colleague said, oh, have you spoken to so-and-so? He's got a photograph of all those witnesses. No, I'll ask him. So he sent a photo. Yeah, I've got it. So what they did, either the Coast Guard or the Navy, they lined them up on the side of the and took a photograph of them. But then again, when you turn the photograph over, it gives you everybody's name.
Right, because it was a common practice before
so
digital.
What we did, we put that photograph out on Facebook, and we said, anybody know any of these people? We'd like to speak to them. Within a couple of hours, Tyler, a young lady had contacted me privately. And she says, they're all deceased apart from one.
Oh,
and I said,
always the case.
She said, yeah, but she says, that one's my father-in-law.
Oh, shoot.
A chap called Earl Ryan, I believe his name. I said, can we speak to him? Yep. Again, the same day, we had his phone number. I passed that on directly to Dr. Scott, and she interviewed Earl Ryan. He was 16 at the time when it happened. He was on that boat with his dad. His father was the one that hit it, and it went
oar.
Yeah.
And again, they are saying this. They are saying that they stuck an oar into the water, and it some sort of physical reaction. So this thing was physically there.
Yes.
Clink.
Dunk. And that's in the same stretch of water Now people will say, well, it's got no connection to Pascagoula and it happened 3 weeks later. I said, well, I don't know. I mean, if you were, you know, if there was a guy shot at the bus stop and then another guy was shot at the other side of the road 3 weeks later, you kind of think there was a link somewhere there, you know? It's in the same place, something bizarre happening. But again, we have all that documented, Tyler. This is not hearsay. You know, we have it all documented, no redactions. There's even a handwritten letter in those documents that I think was sent to the UFO researcher at the time. Can't remember his name, but we have, and it's by one of the Coast Guard crew, and he did a little drawing of it. Can't make out what the drawing is, but Leonard Stringfield. The letter was sent to Leonard Stringfield. And so we have all that, you know, so it's more testimony this time from the Coast Guard. And they saw it too, and they hit it and it went clunk.
Wow, it's amazing to me. And across most of these reports, they're all reporting that there's this blue light.
A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, yes. It seems the closer to the river they get the blue light. As they spread out, other witnesses around the area, then they see different things. Again, you know, one of the criticisms at the time in 1973 is that on the bridge, this was a toll bridge, so there was a toll booth. There was a man in it 24/7.
Yes.
The guy who was in it that night never saw nothing. So it doesn't mean it wasn't something there, he just didn't see it.
Yeah,
we have a gentleman by the name of Mr. Rusty Anderson who was driving over that bridge that night with his wife, and he saw it. And he said it was down below us, Philip. And he said it was so low, I thought it was going to crash. He says the next day, I went down by the river to my aunt's house. She lived down there. And he said, before I had a chance to say anything, she said, you'll never guess what I saw last night. You know?
Oh, my God.
Then Calvin Parker had a book signing in Pascagoula. And this old boy with grey hair like mine come up to Calvin and say, can I buy a book, Mr. Parker? Yeah, sign it. Waynette's there. She took the money. And he said, oh, by the way, I saw that thing that night. And he walked away. Luckily for us, again, somebody was taking photographs. So we had a picture of him buying a book. I put it on social media. I'd like to speak to this guy. The lady, I think it was at the library, said, I know who that is. I'll ask him if he'll talk to you. He said, yeah. And it was Mr. Lewis Lee.
Oh,
now, that night of October the 11th, 1973, Mr. Lee was on the other side of the river in the shipyard as a crane operator. And he said, Philip, my cab was about 10 or 12 feet off the ground. As soon as I got in it, I could see this darn thing out over the water, not up in the sky, Tyler, you know. He said I could see it. And it was a whitey blue. He said at times it almost looked transparent in the middle. And he watched it for some minutes. And he said the only reason I took my eyes off it is because my colleague down below is shouting because I've got something on the end of my crane. You know.
Right. He's still working.
And when I looked back, it had gone. So I said to Mr. Lee, God rest him, he's passed away since we interviewed him. I said, did you report it to anybody? He says, Philip, this is 1973. There ain't no Ghostbusters to call. Who the hell are you going to report it to? He said, I told my family. And then, you know, when Mr. Anderson, he was the chap driving over the bridge. He wrote on his Facebook, I've been interviewed about the UFO sighting I had. Yeah. And there's a couple of comments underneath, and there's a lady with a completely different name. She said, oh, I saw it that night. So I contacted her and I said, well, that was an interview. She said, yeah. She was called Pamela Rayleigh Eves. Now, Pamela lived about a mile that way. And she said, our house used to overlook the river, and I was putting my children to bed upstairs, and I'm going to close the curtains. I see this blue thing out over the river.
Jesus Christ.
So what you've got Charlie and Calvin here. You've got over here Rusty Anderson on the bridge.
On the bridge, yeah.
You've got the other side. You've got Mr. Lewis Lee in the shipyard. And then you've got Pamela Rayleigh Eaves about a mile this way. And then if you add in the Blairs, they're literally...
I was going to say, then add the Blairs in.
Yeah. So they're all in the same vicinity. You have pretty much the whole
river covered.
Yep. Yep. Now, when we had Maria hypnotized, I used the same hypnotist while we could to put Calvin under hypnosis again and film it. Not that we needed to, but we just thought it was good to have it on the record visually.
Yeah.
And this time I put some questions for the hypnotist.
Like more pointed questions?
Well, but she knew what to expect now.
Right.
So I said, just ask Calvin, when he stood on that pier with his fish, his rod in the water, can he just describe what he sees in front of him? Not behind him, what happens? So Calvin, she asked the questions. He said, yeah. He said, there's a boat going up. And there was the company name on it, NOOA, Noah.
Oh my God, you were getting corroborating evidence for the other other sites.
Well, then he says there's the bridge there. And, and he said, and right at the end, Tyler, the little throwaway comment, he says, oh, there's two figures on the other side of the river.
The Blairs.
Now, is that the Blairs? Is it someone else? We'll never know. Because if you don't listen carefully, you'll miss it. And I jumped when he said it. I thought, what? That's not what we expected at all. So we have all that on record.
Maria, in her regression, sees Calvin and Charles possibly. Yeah. And now Calvin is seeing possibly the Blairs on the other side. Possibly. It blows my mind how this case is not the smoking gun.
Well, to me, it is. It's the ultimate case. I started in this subject back in the 1980s, and I never thought I'd end up with anything like this. And it keeps growing. There's other stuff as well. We could be here all night. What we've done, you showed a little piece of it. I've worked with producer Darcy Weir. We've made a 4-part documentary. There it is, Pascagoula 73.
Very well made.
It tells some of these stories. So you'll see Maria on there, both under hypnosis and under interview. You'll see vintage footage of Charlie and Calvin. You'll see Calvin under hypnosis. You'll see a bit about me. That is on Amazon Prime now. So if you're a subscriber to Amazon Prime, you can watch that completely free of charge, wherever you are in the world. It's a 4-part series.
It's a really, Darcy, one thing I really, really love about Darcy is, he's just a machine. He really is. He's a machine. And, he is, again, I liken him to you in that category of people who aren't prone to believing everything. For instance, you have a lot to say about a lot of the, modern post-2017 UFO stuff. I know you have your views. You're not one of these guys who just believes every story they're told, and neither is Darcy.
No, I worked closely with Darcy on this. He came to my house here in England and interviewed me, and I think he's done a great job. He's got some great reconstructions, some fantastic graphics that aren't the kind of cheap and cheerful stuff you can just download online. He's done his best. And we've got a lot of vintage stuff on there as well, because obviously we can't interview any of the guys now. They're both passed away, so we have to rely on what we have in that respect. But again, thanks to friends and colleagues out there, we've uncovered a whole raft of other visual material since we made that documentary.
Right. So the case keeps growing.
It keeps growing. There is more to come. There is more to come. And I'll give one example. It's not exactly the case, but out of the blue, somebody sent me a link and said, I've just listened to this on YouTube. What it was, a gentleman had recorded his father. I think it's in Mobile, Alabama. And his father had a sighting on October 1973. In fact, he saw it several times the same night. He was out on a double date and they saw this thing, and he took the girlfriend home and he sees it again. He's even got a period of missing time.
No way.
So this chap had the sense to record his father and then upload that recording to YouTube. There's no visual; it's just audio.
It's just the
quality,
audio recording.
But it's Mobile's not that far away, I think, from Pascagoula, and it's October 1973.
So it's almost like
it's popped into my inbox. I don't know the person that sent it, you know. So we've got we're out there.
Yeah.
So now when people are finding information, they think, who's that guy who's been doing all the work on it? Oh, that Mantle fella, I'll send him this. I'll send him this.
Right.
So
well, and I think people feel comfortable with you because you don't judge them. You take it.
No.
You ask the right questions, and I think people feel comfortable with someone like you who, is not going to call them crazy or. And
what we've done with the information we've built up, Tyler, is again we leave that door open. This is what we've found. This is who the witnesses are. This is what they had to say. We've interviewed them. These are photographs. These are the documents. You make up your own mind. We're not trying to indoctrinate anybody and say, this is what happened. In my opinion, and it is only an opinion, is that we had, to begin with, we had two ordinary men who encountered something extraordinary that night. That has since expanded much further than we ever imagined.
Yeah, it could honestly be one of the most well-documented mass sightings. I mean, at this point, I think it's pretty safe to say that, so we talked about in the beginning, that beyond a reasonable doubt, there was a craft that was up, that was in the air over the Pascagoula River, not up in the sky, specifically over the river. And I mean, it's just remarkable. And then the Coast Guard comes in, they see something underwater. We were not, it's not related.
Well, Maria Blair said she saw it coming down the river, and she wondered. It's only a wonder. She wondered if they were using the river as a map to follow the river.
Exactly.
It's just and of course, since we made the documentary, since we wrote that book. A lot of the new stuff is in another book called Pascagoula Uncovered. That's out now, but there's a lot more in there that hasn't seen the light of day. Videos, that's the one. Yes. So we've got more material in that. We've closed a few loose ends and settled that, because I told you about the bridge tender that night. He was in the newspaper. He said, I didn't see anything. And
so that's funny that they tried to use that as a
counter. However, there was a UFO researcher, I think it's Richard Hayden, wrote to the bridge tender, and he wasn't as obstructive when he was contacted by a UFO researcher rather than the press. He's saying, well, I wasn't looking. I'm doing something else.
Right. So it's probably a case of the media kind of taking the words, kind of what Calvin was worried about, right? Was the words being miscued. So the bridge tender could have more or less said, I didn't see anything, but I also wasn't looking for something. I was doing my job.
So what you see in the new book is the actual letters themselves. I quote from them. I reproduce the letters so you can read it for yourself, Tyler. Now, the main debunker in 1973 was the late Philip Klass.
Oh my Lord!
So
quite
Philip Klass tried to say that Charlie Hickson's polygraph test was null and void because the guy who gave him it, only a few weeks after the event, wasn't qualified. He was called Scott Glasgow. And not only that, Scott Glasgow came from New Orleans. And he was saying, why didn't they use a couple of the local people? Found out that the local people, there were two places in the area that could have done it. One said, I'm not getting involved with UFOs, full stop. The other one said, we only run polygraphs on people who have been accused of a crime. Mr. Parker and Mr. Hickson haven't. Now, when this all took off, when it all happened, the shipyard gave Charlie and Calvin the use of their attorney. It was called Mike Kalingo. They didn't need him, but it's just something the shipyard did. Just so happened, Mr. Kalingo knew a detective agency in New Orleans that did polygraphs, and they could get him to do it for nothing. So they shipped the guy, Scott Glasgow, over, and he was qualified because during the lockdown, remember the lockdown, the COVID lockdown?
Oh, yeah. I don't think anyone could forget the terrible COVID lockdown.
Pendleton Detective Agency in New Orleans was still open. And it was still the same guy that ran it. So I wrote to them. And then they replied to me via email. And they explained the situation. So we closed that door. But it doesn't really matter, Tyler, because if you pass a polygraph test, skeptics will say, well, they're not admissible in court. If you fail it, you're a goddamn liar. So you can't win either way. But the polygraph examiner was very skeptical. And he ran the test 3 times. Because he wanted Charlie to fail. And of course, he didn't fail.
It is very funny that you said that like that because, if you pass the polygraph, well, it's only a tool among others. But if you fail it, it's you failed. You must be lying. This is So I think it's good to put that into context as well.
Yeah,
because
so that's in Pascagoula Uncovered, and a lot more in there as well.
Right, and you and I have talking privately, with also with Dr. Irina Scott, but I think something bigger happened in the span of like that September area to the December 1973. There are so many cases. It seems like the UFO, there must have been. It seems like there was a surge in activity in the year 1973.
Well, we also have to remember Dr. Scott. Now, in October 1973, she lives in Ohio, but she was in Missouri. She was studying for a PhD.
Yeah.
And her mother phoned her, and she said, "Have you heard that big bang?"
Yeah.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. There's been this huge bang, this huge noise. It's rattled the windows and so on. I mean, I didn't think much of it. The mother rang the next day. So there's been UFO sightings. People are hiding under the tables and what have you. And Dr. Scott wasn't involved in UFO research then. She was studying for a PhD. She thought they're all bonkers.
Right.
So some years later, this event popped back into her consciousness for some reason. And she remembered the year and she remembered the month, but she couldn't figure out when it was. And she went to the local reference library and looked through the old newspaper cuttings and she found the details of it. This huge, I call it a sonic boom. She tells me off for that because it wasn't a sonic boom, but it's the best way I can describe it. Happened on
it was the noise that wasn't just...
October the 11th, 1973, it happened. And it went halfway across the same date. It went halfway across the United States. So what Irina did, she put on her scientist head and tried to figure out how this noise had been made, and she couldn't find anything. Jet aircraft, rockets, meteorites, you name it. She worked with others on it. She couldn't find an explanation whatsoever.
Yeah. Now, am I mistaken in saying that this is? I think it is either the first or second loudest recorded noise ever.
Yeah. Second only to the island of Krakatoa.
Right. Yes. Okay. So it was second.
Yeah.
So what could possibly make such a sound?
I don't know.
I mean, it
Irene is the scientist, not me, and she couldn't find an answer.
and I mean, this is heard. I mean, not to mention the fact that it's the same exact day,
Yeah.
as the Pascagoula case, halfway across the country, or some miles away. But that this sound was, so could this been a portal, or an opening in the space time? Like, I mean, your mind starts to go so many different places with it, with the uptick in activity, the UFO activity.
Well, one other little thing is that's not necessarily a smoking gun, but a fascinating thing happened after the last book came out. Sadly, after Darcy's documentary was finished, I was contacted by a guy called Mr. Van Payne. Mr. Payne thought he was the first person to interview Charlie and Calvin after their encounter. I said, okay.
Yeah.
What Mr. Van Payne was, he was a photojournalist at the time, only a young guy. But he said, I had a contact in the sheriff's department. And I was tipped off Charlie and Calvin. He said, when I got there, they'd gone. So he said, I went back the next morning. And of course, they were gone again. They'd gone to the Singing River Hospital. He went there. He'd missed them again. They'd gone to Keesler Air Force Base. So we went out to Keesler Air Force Base and he waited outside. And when they came out, he asked for an interview on camera. And they said no.
Huh.
So he persuaded them to be interviewed with their backs to the camera. They've got their backs to the camera and he's here in front of us with his microphone and the camera's here and he interviews them. And so that's the first ever media interview with Charlie and Calvin. And he sent me it and we have permission to use it. Not only that, Tyler, of course, this was all on film in those days, not digital, it's film. Further along this piece of film, there's another interview that Mr. Payne did. This time it's with the civil defense establishments, their meteorologist. Can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Huh.
But he tracked something on radar.
There was radar evidence?
Absolutely. And we have
no
him.
Way.
Yeah, Mr. Van Payne interviews him in his radar station, office, whatever you want to call it. And there's no cover up. The guy sat there with talking away. And what is really interesting, there's then two final interviews. These are completely different. There was a local taxi driver claimed that a UFO landed in front of him and this crab-like creature came out. He forgot that his pal was parked behind him and he didn't see anything. His pal was interviewed as well, saying he's talking bunk on it. So we even had a hoax thrown in for good measure.
Just for good. Do you think that there's a possibility? Yeah, well, I won't go down that route because we could speculate about that all day. I was gonna say, do you think that they tried to inject some nonsense in
the guy stepped forward? So as a journalist, you go and interview him, and you either use it or you don't.
Right.
So
right.
They would have only used seconds, if not minutes, of these interviews on a news broadcast.
Yes.
We've got the whole lot, so we can show it all if need be.
Do you think? I do want to kind of get into speculative territory here. I mean, with the topic coming so far, I think that if you asked, out of 100 people in 1973, if UFOs existed, maybe 20 to 30 would say yes, and the rest would probably say no. But if you took that same survey today, I think 99 out of 100 would say that there's life outside of Earth. Whether it's coming here, I mean, that's a different story. But the topic has progressed nonetheless. Hearings in Congress, pretty high level testimony, some videos coming out that are military recorded. People are much in a much more much more of that headspace. Do you think that well, I guess do you think that this will remain it will remain as the most well documented case, and maybe one that could be used to usher in some sort of disclosure? Because you said earlier Charles had talked about how these beings wanted to help humanity. Could it have been that this chain reaction was set off to have the story be told and have it to come together at the right time? Maybe people weren't ready for it back then, but they are now, and the evidence is mounted so much. It just seems like maybe I'm pulling at straws here, but maybe Charles wasn't wrong. Maybe he was one of the devices that these beings that occupied the craft were going to use.
We'll probably never know, Tyler. All we can say is, look, we've accumulated all this information, all this documentation, and all these witnesses. What does it amount to?
Right.
What is it we're dealing with here? So even the skeptics have moved the goalposts, because initially Philip Klass just said it was a hoax.
Just downright hoax.
Yeah, well, that was one of his standard fallbacks. If he couldn't figure it out, just call it a hoax, And I've got Philip Klass's whole file on it, and he's not looking to research it. He's just looking for some dirt to throw. Because if you throw enough dirt, some of it sticks. Then you had another gentleman right in 2013, Joe Nickel, who was part of the same skeptics organization. Joe now called it some kind of psychological explanation for them. So he called it more or less, I can't pronounce it properly, excuse me, but it's called a folie à deux.
Folie à deux.
It's where two people can have a phantom whatever at the same time. They can have an illusionary experience.
A shared hallucination.
Yeah. But what tends to happen with that is this: somebody has a very strong belief, and then you have a weak-willed second person, and he imparts that on him. Eventually, he believes it. Yeah, what they forget is Charlie and Calvin had only been together a day. They didn't even work together, so they were only together driving to work and driving home at night. Calvin lived 200 miles away, so. And they had the exact same, not the exact same, but very, very similar experiences. So even the skeptics come 2013 have moved their goals on it. And I tried to explain this to Calvin. I said, even if it was a shared experience, wouldn't that be fantastic? We could study that, you know? But it's not. Calvin wanted an answer. And if I could have said, look, I found it. This is the answer. Whatever the hell X was, this is the answer. He would have been happy with it. There's another guy who was a British author. A few miles up the way is a place called Horn Island. And I believe the military have done some tests there with various chemicals and so on. Yeah. But it closed in the 1960s. And he believed that this was some kind of military experiment where they put an hallucinogenic spray into the air. And again,
it's almost more ridiculous to say
there's
these
boats.
things.
There's boats floating up and down the river. There's traffic going over the bridge. Are you really gonna put a hallucinogenic agent into the atmosphere?
That sounds like a Batman villain.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I mean, it's almost more ridiculous to say.
Well, then I read another one that it was the Russians. These creatures were actually Russians dressed in their underwater swimming outfit, and they were behind them. You don't know the Russian. There was nobody in the water. These weren't Russian spies in with their aqualungs on and their goggles.
Yeah. I mean,
because
if you're gonna say something like that, at least have some, again, the evidence, the puncture marks, the corroborating witnesses,
exactly.
all the evidence, all the data is suggesting something extraordinary happened, and these people are trying to say, yeah, it's a Russian. Okay, where is the evidence to suggest that
there isn't any.
Exactly.
There isn't any. And I forget who's the head of. Is it Michael? Is it Shermer?
Michael Shermer. Yes,
he's sort of the head of the skeptics movement. I've tried to get in touch with him to debate this case, but I've never managed to be successful. I would gladly do that, but maybe that's for the future.
Yeah, I think so. So if we're gonna get into a little speculation here before we wrap up, but what do you think that these beings, if we're gonna go on the notion that it is some sort of non-human intelligence, it's not some black budget special access program, something like that. If we're on the notion that it's non-human intelligence, what do you think that those beings that they saw were, because they were different than how people would often describe the Greys or
they are unique to this case. That's another
so
unique item is these wrinkly skin creatures.
Robots or some sort of.
Right from the very beginning, Charlie and Calvin called them robots simply because of the way they moved. Couldn't hear them breathing. They never made a noise. And we have that on the recordings that were made, within 2 days, this happening. One of those recordings is Dr. Hynek interviewing Sheriff Fred Diamond. And they're talking about robots. So it's not something that was invented at some point, in the future. They were talking about it there and then. And of course, Calvin, in his encounters, saw this female creature.
I was going to say
almost human. He did say she looked like she had a mask on, but she was almost human. And this is Calvin, he did have a sense of humor. I said, well, what did she look like? He says, all I can tell you is if you saw her in a bar, you'd buy her a drink.
Yeah.
That's the way he could describe it.
So they were in charge. Good-looking woman. Yeah. But she had a little bit of an extended middle finger.
That's right.
Or something.
Yeah.
Something like that. So
she was also in Calvin's encounters when he was a young fella. He saw her then. He saw the one in 1993. And we're going to finish off and say that there was another encounter in 1992. And we'll deal with that at some point in the future. It's featured in my book, but it's something, again, that's unique and needs discussing at length in the future.
I absolutely agree.
We may be working on something to do that.
Yes, we may be doing that. So it gets me excited. That's why I love talking about this case, because it's just it is one, because there are the Betty and Barney Hills. There are these stories that, and again, back then the world was a lot different than it is today, right? Yep. It's just for all these people to have seen something similar, the amount of production that would need to go into that. And I that's, in part why I brought up the alien autopsy, because, that was a production, right? So people put that together and, the evidence inevitably came out against it, to that it was a hoax, or not maybe a hoax, but it was made for something else and then used out of context. But you've been on both sides. You've seen a case where it leads and when it falls apart. But with Pascagoula, that just simply hasn't happened. It keeps getting more interesting as the years go on and the evidence mounts.
Absolutely. And, some of the loopholes that we thought were there, that once you look into it, they're not. It's
Right.
easy enough to close them.
Right. And like I said, the amount of work that would have needed to go into to genuinely hoax this and have everybody on the same page, it's stupid. So 2 things real quick. Do you have the radar evidence?
No, we just have the gentleman talking about it. The guy who actually saw the image on
would that
radar.
be obtainable?
I think it's unlikely, but we have his testimony nonetheless.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Because
we have to remember, in those days, a lot of things used to get wiped because they needed to reuse it again.
Space. They needed space.
I mean, it's like TV companies here that recorded things on video. They lost unique archives because they simply taped over them.
Yep.
It was just to save money.
Yeah. That's why when the government, when people FOIA the government and then they say, we destroyed that evidence, or they're like, how could you do such? I'm like, it's easier than you think.
That's why when we got the Coast Guard documents, they tell you what they have. We interviewed this, and this, all the people interviewed, and then it says tape recorder. So what they're putting together, those documents, is based on those interviews, and there's a tape recording. It's highlighted there. So we've got the documents. Is this tape still available? I don't know. Probably. But if you don't ask Tyler, and if they come back and say no, well, that's another avenue, we don't have to worry about anymore. But if they've got it, then can we have a copy, please?
Yes, because that would be, oh my God, would that be, oof. So one more thing, I wanted to bring up is, do you think that it's possible that Philip Klaus was controlled opposition?
I don't know. I think Philip, played both sides. It kept him in the limelight. I don't understand why a skeptic would be like that. But you have it in the paranormal field. You used to have James Randi, for example. He was a great opponent of Uri Geller.
Yeah.
But that made him famous. The more he attacked Uri, the more famous he got, and the more famous, the great James Randi got. Right. And I've met and interviewed Uri Geller. I've sat in his living room. It's a house that he's got in England. And,
do you believe him?
Interviewed him. Not necessarily, no. But I used to work for a magazine. They wanted an interview with him. I travelled down and sat. Very nice guy, very nice man, and we talked a lot about football more than anything. He now has his own museum in Tel Aviv, so I think he's back out living there. Whether he's moved out of the area because of the ongoing hostilities or not, I don't know. But his house was worth a fortune. His house was worth a fortune, Tyler. And I said to him, I said, Uri, you didn't buy this house bending spoons for a living. Where the hell did you get your money from? Yeah. And he said, you're right, Philip. I got my money from dowsing for oil. And I was paid on results. No find any oil, no get any money. And he told me that. And we became friendly for a while. And in 1999, I had a near fatal heart attack. And I was in hospital. And Uri rung the hospital and thanked the nurses for looking after me. And he sent them a signed card thanking them. And he'd no reason to do that. He just did it out of the blue.
Really?
So he's a really nice guy. I don't believe in virtually anything that he says. But he says he doesn't care. It's like Charlie and Calvin. I don't care whether you believe me. But Calvin would say, if you call me a liar, I'm going to punch your lights out. And Uri's the same. I don't care if you believe me, but if you call me a hoaxer, I'll sue you. You know, it's a different approach. One time Calvin met Philip Klaus and he told him exactly what he was going to do to him if he ever called him a liar again. You know.
Yeah, it put the fear of God into him. Because Calvin's a big boy.
He was
You
a
know,
tough guy. You know,
he was
Calvin,
a big boy, yeah.
Calvin didn't mind a fight at all. And he said at
No,
high
yeah.
school, if anybody bothered with his brother, then they got me to deal with, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
and that's the type of person he was. And that's not the type of person who, and again, he's a very reserved person. Anyone can see that from any of the interviews and any of the kind of the witness, not the witness, but the researcher. Everyone, the way they talk about Calvin is that he was kind of like a teddy bear. He was big, but he
believed in God. He disliked he disliked all politicians, so he didn't take anybody political stance. When he was younger, he said he found two guys in the woods beating up a black guy. So Calvin got hold of these two guys and knocked 7 bells out of them. You know, so he wasn't racist. You know,
right?
And he was a hard-working, honest guy. You know, and in October 1973, he had his life set out. He was getting married in November. So he was going to get married, buy a house, have children, have grandchildren, retire. That was it.
Sunset.
That was it. But that night of October the 11th, 1973, changed his life forever.
History had plans for Calvin. History had plans. I'm just this, we'll end here is that I want to hear you say it. Everything that you've heard, after everything that you've seen, everything you've dug into, do you believe Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were abducted by a non-human intelligence in October of 1973?
I don't think we can prove that. I think we can prove that something quite extraordinary happened to these two individuals and maybe others, and were witnessed in part by others. But what happened to them, Tyler, it's for somebody else smarter than me to figure out. The way I look upon my role is to document these incidents and put that into the growing pile of evidence that we have, and hopefully somebody somewhere will figure it out. Somebody smarter than me. What I will say, something very bizarre happened. What your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah. And Phil, I think the community, the UFO researching community owes such a great debt to you for how much legwork you've put into this case. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have Calvin. We wouldn't have Calvin's book. He probably wouldn't have come forward the way he came forward, and we wouldn't have had any time with him. If albeit the latter half of his life, we wouldn't have had anything. I think you were the bridge that brought him into the light, that allowed him to tell his story and not feel subjugated or crazy or anything like that.
We became good friends.
Yes.
And Calvin I'd earned his trust.
Yes.
And no matter what we did, I would not do it without Calvin's say so.
Right.
And he would say, you don't have to ask me. I said, Calvin, this is your story, not mine.
Yes.
It's easy for me to say yes. I said to him, if you don't want to do these things, then don't do them. There's nobody going to say anything. For example, he spoke at a few conventions. Nobody made him do that. He wanted to do it. There is a movie written about Calvin. I've read the script, and it might be moving forward at some point. But I warned him. I warned him. I said, Calvin, if you go down the movie route, it may the end finishing part may not be 100% accurate.
Right. Look at Fire in the Sky with Travis Walton.
Be aware of that. And if you don't want to do it, nobody's going to force you. But he's done it, and the writers worked closely with Calvin. They spoke to him, read his books. They would check things on it. I've read the screenplay. it is about 95% accurate as it stands. That if it ever goes into production, that can change, of course.
Was it a film or was it a
no,
like
this
a
is-
film
this
or a
is-
series?
No, this is a feature film. There's been 2 written. There's been a feature film written and a 4-part drama series. And whether we'll ever see any of them in production's a different matter, but they are there.
Well, I think the time is ripe for greenlighting anything that has to do with UFOs. I think right now is in the zeitgeist. You know, I mean, what's your take on the? Because I did want to ask this, but I forgot. What's your take on all the latest whistleblower stuff happening? And I mean, do you think there's a possible chance of an actual disclosure of some sort? Like, has that changed for you?
No.
No.
Simple as that. No, not a waste of time. All of them.
Okay. I respect that. I respect that, Mr.
I
Mr.
hope
Mantle.
I'm wrong. You know, I would be happy to somebody come and poke finger at me and say you were wrong. I'd hold my hands up. But no, complete waste of time. Don't listen to them. There's nothing. I mean, when you talk about disclosure, they keep saying, "Oh, the government's got this." The government. How the hell do you know we've got it?
Right.
You know.
Right.
I mean, you know, I think the government, whoever the hell the government is, because they never tell you who the hell they mean.
Yeah.
They don't know any more than we do, Tyler, because you or I don't investigate UFOs. We investigate sightings of UFOs. So by the time we get to the witness, it's been and gone. You know, and they keep talking about alien crashes, and how many crashes can there be?
Yeah, that's one thing that's really never sat right with me.
How long do you stop sending spaceships from wherever the hell they're coming from before you realize they're crashing here? If we go back to Roswell, supposedly the earliest crash, you traverse the galaxy somehow to get here, and then what do? You crash in the desert.
It doesn't.
I think Roswell was a balloon. I'll go on the record. I've written an article about it, and the reason I've come to that conclusion is because Marcel Jr. was the first to see the I-beams with these inscriptions on. We all think, I've met Jesse, he's been here, lovely guy, telling the truth. If you look at the wreckage of the photographs that were taken in General Ramey's office, they were taken by a photographer called James Bond Johnson. It's a radar reflector, and I don't know if it's under the chair or on the table, is the balloon, because it started to go grey or brown because it's been in the sun for a while, right? There's a piece of something sticking out at the end, something supporting. I'm pretty sure that when you look at the enhanced image, it's got one of those markings on that Marcel talks about, one of those hieroglyphs.
Really?
So if it's got a hieroglyph in General Ramey's office, then the junk that his father put on the office, on his kitchen floor that night, is also a balloon.
Yeah.
Because it's a balloon in Ramey's office. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
Having said that, I've just released an article of a guy who said he's seen photographs of the aliens at Roswell. So I may be totally wrong. That is just my take on it.
But that's why I like you, Phil. Is you're like and people take a cue here, because I think that what we've lost is the ability to be like you and to be willing to be wrong. Actually, you probably hope you're wrong in most cases.
Absolutely.
But you're also not dense, and you're not going to believe that everyone's channeling aliens and talking about crash retrievals. And I get it. I get where you're coming from. You're a skeptical believer. Skeptical believer. You're humble.
All it is most UFO sightings that are reported to us have a conventional explanation.
Yes, and I think we all know that.
And that will be the same to the be it to the US military or whoever.
Yeah.
That's why they they'll have these little grainy pieces of crap that's released. And for, in a few months down the line, they'll say it's a balloon or it's an aeroplane, because they finally got around to having a look at it. Just because it's the Air Force or the government doesn't necessarily mean they're getting any better quality data than we are as civilians. In fact, I would say we get more data than they do, because we're actively looking for it. And I think some civilian organizations do a pretty damn job. Some do crap, but some do a pretty damn good job. And
I agree.
I wondered what would happen if we had something like Pascagoula happen today, but it involved a serving military personnel. They could be at home on leave, they don't have to be in uniform or anything like that.
That's what I mean.
Then what would happen?
I think the world would shatter. I truly do.
I keep hearing all these accusations. Oh, they're not allowed to tell them, or they'll get killed. What's his fella from down under? Oh, there's been people killed to keep these
Ross
quiet.
Coulthart.
Who's being killed? Who the hell's been murdered to keep this quiet? Surely, if they'd been murdered to keep this quiet, they'd have shot you bugger, for releasing it. They'd have shot you first. It don't make any sense.
It doesn't make sense. I will agree with you there. And that's the good thing, is we can live in a world where we know that 95% of sightings and encounters most likely have a prosaic explanation, but there's that last 5%, and out of that 5%, there's really like 1%. And I think Pascagoula,
you are the first person I've heard you say that, apart from me, Tyler.
Yeah,
because it's a lot less than 5%. We get an occasional case that comes along every now and again,
Yes,
and that's what we're looking for.
That's only one of them has to be. Only one has to be real.
I think this one is,
I do.
because of everything that we've managed to come across. We've found extra witnesses. There's extra witnesses coming in slowly but surely. There are others out there, I know for a fact.
Yeah.
I'll show you how things happen. One last thing, and I've got to go. I mentioned Chelsea Norton Prince. She runs the Ocean Springs Historical Society. She met Calvin, she bought a book, put a couple of posts on her Facebook page. One of her members, called Bethany, said in 2011, when Charlie Hickson died, my mum and dad bought his house. And he had these boxes of papers in it.
No.
Do you want them? Do you want them? She gave them to Chelsea. Chelsea knew what I was up to. She contacted me and said, do you want a copy of them, Philip? And I tell you what, she digitized them in rapid procession. Now, there's no smoking guns in it because these are around the 1990s. However, and we'll just leave it here, there's one letter in there from a NASA physicist. His name's on it, his address is on it. I checked him out. He was a NASA physicist. I think he's deceased now. But he wrote to Charlie Hickson and said, when your encounter took place, I went to my boss and asked him to investigate it, and they declined.
Holy shit.
So if he's telling the truth, and we've no reason to suspect that, he asked his boss at NASA to look into the Hickson and Parker event, and they declined. Would they do the same now? I don't know.
And who knows? Maybe they declined publicly, or they declined him. But once they knew of it, maybe they started looking at it, and I could imagine something like that happening. So who knows? Who really does know? That's a really good place to leave it on. And I'll say this: there's more. The Pascagoula case there's more coming. There is more coming.
There's more coming.
Phil, you are such a treasure, man. I am so happy that I've gotten to know you over the years, and still one of my favorite guests of all time. I think, like I said, the UFO community is owed a tremendous debt to someone like yourself. You put so much work and time in. How can people follow what is going on in Philip Mantle's world? Any books coming out?
Well, we've got the 2 books out now, Beyond Reasonable Doubt and Pascagoula Uncovered. Please avail yourself of those. They follow on from each other. We have Pascagoula 73, the 4-part documentary series, out now on Amazon Prime, produced by Darcy Weir. And there'll be more to come in the future. You know, there will be more to come.
Yeah. And you know, things that are, you know, in media, more, I think, that are going to be more immersive, and they're going to be able to show that, you know, there's like your book says, that with the title. I think that's such a spot on title, is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. I mean, because I think this case, like you said, if you brought it up to a jury of our peers and presented the case in its fullest, I think the evidence suggests that, as you say, something happened on the night of October 11th, 1973.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Philip.
So, great pleasure talking to you, Tyler.
As always, my friend, you know, and we have some talking to do. I'll email you, and we'll get on the horn. For everyone else, make sure to like, share, subscribe. If you're listening on one of the amazing podcast platforms, leave us a rating and a review. It really helps with the pesky algorithms. And if you want to go and support the channel further, we're opening it up now. We're kind of playing on like the asset program. You know, you can buy in an unclassified, classified, or top secret, become an asset of TDP. All members get the same thing. It's early access and ad-free versions of each show, and it's pay what you think the show is worth to you. With that being said, we'll see you on the next time. We'll see you on the next time. That doesn't make sense. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you again.
Learn to speak.